to the African Echo, where the voices are shaping our communities and conversations that are shaping our nation. My name is Pasha, and today we are joined by Michael Swain as an executive director of the very important religious and freedom agency. I'm just going to say that right now, but Mr. Michael is going to assist us unpack. But today we are unpacking a very important conversation around faith, leadership, and the role of the church in today's society. And this is more than just a communication and a conversation, but it's also a reflection of who we are and where we are going as the people. Mr. Michael, thank you so much for joining us and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Portia, and great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
It's so good to see you today, Michael. But we are meeting once again, and we are building this very important dialogue into putting the perspectives and unpacking different voices. And I would like to know from Forza. Maybe if we can just start by just mentioning what is Forza and what does your organization do?
Thank you. Well, FORSA, sometimes also known as 4SA,
Oh,
stands for Freedom of Religion South Africa.
right.
Freedom of Religion South Africa. We are a legal advocacy
Mm,
organization, and our focus is to protect and uphold our constitutional right to religious freedom, which is conscience, thought, belief, opinion, and faith. But it
mm,
also is a basket of human rights. It includes, obviously, how you express, what you can say or not
right.
say, um, association, assembly, faith-based institutions like schools, parental rights, your right to pass on your faith to your children. So, in
Right.
the one hand, it's very simple. It's like religious freedom, but it has a number of very clear expressions and quite a number of expressions.
Mm,
And we exist to literally protect those against erosion. Because what is happening all over the world, it's a global issue, is that
right.
religious freedom is steadily being converted from a right for you to live out, express
Right.
your faith in private, in public, without fear of sanction or hindrance, into a much more limited right to say to worship. You know,
Right.
you can worship in your church, you can worship in your home, but we don't want that out in the public square, so to
Mm,
speak. But
right.
that
And
isn't religious freedom. So everywhere you see religious freedom being eliminated or eroded, that's where we engage.
and 4SA has been very vocal about the Section 22 process. I mean, it's been so chaotic. From your perspective, and a person who is in the advocacy and the legal side of things, what are the core concerns, especially for religious communities that should understand about this section?
Well, you really have to look and understand it. What is religious freedom as a human right?
Right.
Your right to religious freedom is not a right that governments grant you. It
Mm,
is what is called a pre-existent right. You are entitled to believe whatever it is you believe, in conscience, in thought, in belief, in opinion, in whatever faith you may hold, simply by virtue of the fact that you are a human being.
right.
And what you believe and how you believe and how you express that belief, that is absolutely central and integral to who you are as a human being, who you are as a person, to your human dignity. We
Mm,
don't just, when we leave the home in the morning, check our faith and beliefs in as we go out the door and we go
right.
out into the world. And no, they go with us wherever we go. And your freedom of religion right attaches to you, therefore, individually.
Right.
So when we're talking about religious freedom, we're talking about something that states are there to protect and uphold and promote,
Right.
never, ever to interfere with and regulate in as much as they start to decide who can or who cannot preach, who can or who cannot have a religious organization, or any form of interference in how you believe your doctrine. Obviously, everything happens within the realm of
Right.
law. So you could never use, for example, your religious freedom to do something that is unlawful. You can't commit a crime like the so-called prophet of doom. Remember him? You know, he sprayed
Mm,
insecticide in some poor woman's face and said, God told me it would heal them. Well, that was an
right.
assault, and he was
Mm,
duly charged, duly convicted. So it isn't a license to do whatever you want, but it is very importantly, it is a right that the state recognizes and guarantees and upholds.
mm,
Why there's such a problem with what the CRL is doing is the CRL trying to turn that right into a conditional license that the state will grant you as long as you jump through certain hoops, as long as you fulfill certain criteria, as long as you get their standard of approval that they want to give you. That is interference. And all you're going to get is a conditional license. And of course, understand that when you get a license, that license is number one, conditional, and number two, it can be revoked.
Okay.
And that isn't a right at all. You've literally taken an inalienable God-given right and you've converted it into a state conditional privilege. And that is why this is such a huge battle for religious freedom, because as soon as the state gets control of the religious sector and can control what it does, it can silence it and it can extract money from it. And that's what you see in other countries in Africa, unfortunately, where this has already happened.
Right. And it has been a real concern and a huge issue. And many faith leaders are really fearing what you just mentioned, the conversation around accountability that could lead to now states regulating their religion. Why does Forza see this as a serious concern? I understand the licensing, but it isn't. And when we spoke to the commissioner last week, she referred this to just having every other carrier to be licensed and also to be able to be verified. Is this really needed in the religious space as well?
Not only is it not needed, it's not appropriate. So let's just clear one thing up right off the bat. The religious sector is heavily regulated.
Right.
Anybody who has a religious organization has to register it typically as a non-profit organization or a non-profit company. Everybody who employs somebody in their church has to fill in all the right forms and do the tax returns. If you have a building, you have building codes and local building municipal regulations and that type of thing. So it's not the Wild West for the religious sector at all.
Right.
But where the distinction comes in is the CRL chair says that being a pastor, being an imam, being a rabbi, being a priest, that's a profession. And that is where the problem lies, because it's a profession, yes, in as much as you earn money from what you do. But I don't think, and I've never met anybody who is either a pastor, an imam, a rabbi, or a priest who have said, I'm just doing this as a way to make money. They do it because it is a calling.
Right.
And we need to understand that a calling is very different from a profession. If you have a profession, and obviously, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're an accountant, there is a prescribed body of knowledge that you need to know in order to fulfill that function and to do it well. I do not want to be lying outside an operating theatre and the surgeon looks down at me through his mask and he says, I got a calling this morning to be a brain surgeon and I thought that I'd just experiment on you. Obviously not. You need to know that he knows what he's doing and he needs to have all the certifications necessary. But when you come to faith, faith is by definition something that is unique. It is personal. The role of the state, and particularly the role of the CRL, is not to impose some form of orthodoxy for a faith. To have some, if you just do this 3-year course on Christianity, then we'll give you a tick and then you can go and preach. Because there are some 40,000 different denominations in the world of Christianity today, which is pretty much clear we do not all agree on the same interpretation. So as soon as you try to impose some form of standardization, you are inevitably infringing on people's individual right to believe and to express that belief however they want to interpret different doctrines differently. This is what faith is. And the Constitutional Court, and this is very important because don't forget, that is our ultimate apex court. Our Constitution is interpreted by the Constitutional Court. And so you might have a provision in the Constitution, Section 15, which says you have the right to freedom of religion, conscience, thought, belief, opinion, and faith. Great. But then the Constitutional Court will make judgments on that from time to time when a case comes before them. And one of the things that they have said is that even if what you believe is bizarre, irrational, illogical, incapable of any form of proof, you are protected. The Constitution protects your right to believe that. So as soon as you see people coming in and trying to standardize it and give you a certificate of good standing because what you believe is now acceptable, that is obviously an infringement of your constitutional rights. And therefore, what the CRL is proposing is unconstitutional. And it is absolutely not what they are empowered to do. Because don't forget, the CRL, and let's just maybe explain for a minute who the CRL is. They are one of the commissions that is set up by the South African Constitution, specifically to give special protection to areas where the founders, the drafters of the Constitution felt that was needed. So we have different commissions that are set up by the Constitution. We've heard of the Human Rights Commission, the Electoral Commission. We've heard of the Public Protector. These are commissions or positions set up specifically to protect certain very key constitutional rights. The CRL is one of them. It stands for Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Rights Commission. So it actually has three different branches, so to speak. So we're talking about religion. But then within that, they have an act of parliament that's passed, which gives them the powers, the prerogatives, how they can operate, the constraints within which they operate. And the CRL is emphatically not empowered to regulate the church, to propose legislation to regulate the church. They are outside of what they're intended to do. And so this is one of the big challenges is that we believe, and this is what some of the litigation, the lawsuits are about, is that they're actually operating outside of what they're actually allowed to do anyway. And therefore, it's actually unlawful what they're trying to do anyway. And so this, again, is why, among other things, the faith communities are very concerned. And the second reason, of course, is that this very issue that we're discussing now was extensively debated and discussed, including 6 days of hearings before Parliament back in 2017, 2018. And Parliament, having heard all the arguments that we're now rehashing, said we are not supporting a proposed legislative framework for peer review committees and state regulation of religion. So why are we back having the same discussion? And the answer is very simple, and it's one person. It is the CRL Rights Chairperson, Mrs. Toka Umkunazi Halufa. She is pushing this agenda, which Parliament has already said no to, and which, frankly, nobody in the faith community thinks is either constitutional. It's not necessary because we have all these laws and regulations that we have to abide by. And also it's unworkable. How on earth do you vet, manage, monitor, register all the faith communities of South Africa, all the religious practitioners of South Africa? That is a massive bureaucratic system that they're trying to set up.
Right.
And where are they going to get the money to do that?
This is very, very important. And I'm just sitting here, and I have been, since last week when I started the first episode, I have so many comments, especially on our TikTok page. And I'm going to read this one to you, Mr. Michael. It says, setting standards for spiritual ethics is in a democratic setup when there's a series of laws seen unethical already that have passed. And he believes that this feels like untrue, and it's uncertain that this really can be able to pass into something, into a tangible law, so to say.
You know, unfortunately, one of the things that happens sometimes, and governments can be guilty of this, is when they're not necessarily doing what they should be doing, which is effectively enforcing existing laws, they then look for an opportunity to redeem that by passing more laws. So, and this is the conundrum. So, as I said to you, every single abuse that the CRL have pointed out ever is covered by existing South African laws. We've mentioned the Prophet of Doom. Right. Another person who people know well is Timothy Omatosa. Remember Timothy Omatosa? That case went on for, I think, 7 or 8 years. There was no shortage of laws that he had broken, supposedly. He was charged with 32 different criminal counts, money laundering, sex trafficking, racketeering. I mean, the list was long. The problem there was that the National Prosecuting Authority, which is the state, did such a poor job of prosecuting the case that they didn't actually give the judge sufficient evidence that she needed to pass a conviction. Right. And when she gave her judgment, she soundly rebuked the state, the National Prosecuting Authority, for doing such a bad job. So if you're not enforcing existing laws effectively and efficiently, what makes you think that passing another set of laws, which will be far more complex to implement and to oversee and to action, is going to solve the problem? And another very good question, let's supposing that you do. Let's supposing that every single pastor, and there might be, who knows, 500,000 people who would say religious practitioner, and we're all vetted, we're all now given a license. I now have a license, you have a license. The question is, will that license prevent you from ever breaking the law? And the answer is really simple, because we all have driver's licenses.
Yes.
Have you ever gone 61 in a 60 zone? Have you ever gone up a one-way street? Have you ever parked in a no parking bay? Have you ever crossed that double line when you're overtaking? I think anybody who's honest would say, yes, I have. So, did that license stop you breaking the law? No, it didn't. What happened when you broke the law? Well, maybe the police caught you and you got a fine. That's what the law is there for. A license is not the solution. It is unnecessary because we have these existing laws. What we need is better law enforcement, and that is the state's prerogative. That is the state's duty. It's not for the church to be some kind of quasi police court where we have this council that's overseeing everybody and deciding, are you a good person or are you not such a good person?
Right.
On what criteria? On what? And if you are doing something unlawful or illegal, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to phone the police. And exactly what should be happening now will happen then, except now we've got this license for our faith rather than our inalienable God-given right to our faith.
You have touched so many important topics and points, Michael, especially when you touch on the protection of the religious freedom and so forth. And this touches on the cracks of the current debates, because honestly, I have another one. This one touched my heart, and it's coming from Ufiki. Let's just say there really needs to be a clear line of separation between the church and the government. And there's the church because it's autonomous, and spiritually speaking, its authority comes from God, not from the state. And adding that, because of that, government does not have an authority to judge or control the affairs of the kingdom of God. These are some of the stuff, but there's also been confusion. I'll call it that. Some people.
Can I pick up on what you've just said for a
please,
minute?
yes.
Because you made a very interesting point. You're absolutely correct that the church, let's say the religious community and the state, have separate functions. The religious sector is absolutely integral to the fabric of our society because we are a deeply religious nation. And of course, the church then, church particularly, because 80+% of the people in this country adhere to the Christian faith, according to statistics, that plays an integral part. But the question is, can you actually separate the faith community from government?
Right.
And I would say yes and no. Yes, you can, in as much as government should never have a say in what we believe and how we believe it.
Okay.
But the church typically has historically always had a very powerful and important prophetic role to actually speak to government and to address government. The church is very much the moral compass of the country.
Right.
If things are going badly, one of the roles that the church, and you can look at this throughout all of human history, has played very critically is they see something wrong in society and they address it because of their faith conviction. And then they mobilize to the extent that government listens and takes aligned action. One of those would be, for example, slavery. The reason in the Western world we don't have slavery anymore is because William Wilberforce, who was a Christian, took up the cause, and the faith communities of the UK at that time put so much pressure on government that they changed the laws, and slavery was abolished throughout the British Empire and then throughout the world. In fact, the British then sent their troops, their navies out to stop the slave trade. That was the consequence of the church playing a powerful prophetic role in society. So if government can control the faith communities, if they can basically license you, one of the things that I've seen in every country where state regulation of religion has been implemented is it bans any form of political speech from the faith community, from the pulpit, from the churches. And that silences that very critical point. So yes, you can separate, let's say, the church from the state, but you should never separate God from government.
Right. That's a very, very, very fundamental um conversation right there, Michael. Something that's have been in the back of my mind for quite some time is the possibility of seeing more religious-based political parties. There's upcoming elections, right, this year, and the incoming years in 2029 and so forth. Do you think it's going to maybe change the status quo somehow in the political sphere now?
Look, I think it's very important that people of good faith, shall we say, particularly people who have faith-based beliefs, yes, we should not abdicate from the public square
Right.
because we are Christians, or for that matter, for any faith. Again, one of the big problems, I think, is that the reason why we look at politics and we say politics is a dirty thing is largely because good people have actually pulled out of it. And I think Christians have been maybe the most guilty of that. It's like, we have nothing to do with it. Touch not
Yeah.
the unclean thing. Come
Yeah.
out from among them. But what happens is you leave a vacuum, and who fills the vacuum? Well, not necessarily good people, not necessarily people with good intentions. And so I think absolutely people of faith, Christians particularly, if they're so called, because I do believe it's also a calling, should enter into that public space, should enter into that political world. And they do, in that role, have the opportunity to be very influential because you're there, you're engaged, you're now part of the machinery, so to speak, and you can be salt and you can be light. And there are political parties. I mean, the African Christian Democratic Party is perhaps the best known of them, who
Yes.
have had, albeit a very small number of members of parliament, but from time to time, those members of parliament have made a huge difference because they're in the political space.
Mm.
So, should Christians get involved, let's say specifically, in politics? I would say if that's the calling of God on your life, absolutely yes,
Mm.
because who knows what difference you can make. And all throughout the Bible, you have people who were involved in the political process. Look at Daniel, look at Esther. I mean,
Yeah.
there are numbers of them. Look at Samuel. Look at the judges. I mean, they were involved in the political space, but they were also very much people of faith. So,
Right.
yes, I think there's a very important role for people of faith in the political space.
That's a very good challenge that you just threw right there, Michael. That's a very, very important one. And I think I've always said this, that it's important to be part of the greater community because many things are happening and religious people tend to take a backstage and say, no, 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 not for me and not today. Now, the confusion, Mr. Michael, about whether churches are being licensed and the debates thereafter that comes with that. I do think that it are driven by misinformation because the CRL says it's misinformation that has been spread that they're going to be regulated and licensed and verified and what's so not. Do you think that is the truth in that statement or in such statements?
Well, I think all you have to do is to look at what they have written. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I have a legal background. We are a legal advocacy organization.
Right.
Everything that is written is what is important, right? So when the CRL puts out its final draft declaration for self-regulation, and you read that, and
Right.
you read what they propose a legislative framework for
Right.
self-regulation of religion. And when you read legislative framework, and then they express what they mean by that, there's going to be a council, there's going to be vetting, there's going to be a certificate of good standing, there's going to be disciplinary procedures and sanctions and reportings and what have you. That is not voluntary self-regulation. That is a system, legislation. Who passes legislation? Parliament. Who is Parliament? The state. So when you see a legislative framework, which they're upfront about, they don't often say it, by the way. They try and gloss over the word legislative framework. They just say framework, but in their documents it says legislative framework. Put a big equal sign and say state regulation of religion. And that is something that we absolutely cannot afford to have, because once you have state regulation of religion, you no longer have a meaningful right to religious freedom, as I've
Right.
just emphasized. And where that happens, a good example, the CRL chair, she says we're looking at other African countries who've done this successfully, like Rwanda, for example. Now, Rwanda is a country with 1/5 of the population of South Africa. They're 20% our size in terms of population. They're a very religious country. About sort of 85% of the people of Rwanda claim to be religious in some way. So they're very similar to us. They're just a lot smaller. In the last 7 years, since they have had this state regulation of religion, nearly 10,000 churches, mostly Pentecostal charismatic churches, have been shut down by government. So take that system and bring it to South Africa. That could mean that if they pass the law today, where are we, 2026, by 2033, 7 years' time, which isn't that far away, maybe 40 to 50,000 churches could be shut down in South Africa. Because when the state can control you, they can silence you and they can shut you down. And in Rwanda, they don't have to even give a good reason for shutting you down. So absolutely, we need to be very, very careful. And you mentioned something else that I think is a very important thing about people who think, well, it's not my business. I do think, very importantly, there is absolutely no merit, no credit in being ignorant of what is happening. Christians, the Bible tells Christians that you are in the world, not of the world, but you're very much in the world. And the Great Commission is to make disciples of all nations. How can you make disciples of all nations if you remove yourself from the world and if you're ignorant about what's happening in your nation, and then you sit there sort of wringing your hands when some bad things happen and you wonder what happened? No, ignorance is not bliss. There's another scripture in the book of Acts where the sons of Issachar are commended because they understood the times. And I do think that Christians need to be updated. I do think they need to inform themselves and to be engaged in the very critical issues of the country, because how else can we make a true difference if we don't know what's going on and we don't know how to respond to what we see?
And that is very important. That is highly, highly important. As we are just about to conclude, Michael, I'm just going to throw you this one. In many a times, societies, the cries is that a person will say, the church has done, or I pay money. This is a common factor in many a times that we pay a lot at church, and I have been emotionally abused and so forth. So where exactly is the church verifying these, and who actually takes care of these people? Because I will make a typical example. In a township, you will have 25 churches in one area, and probably doesn't even have, and I'll call them churches instead of calling it ministries for the sake of not being blatant, but for the sake that I also have a church, I'm also have a church, and that person has a church. But what happens inside there, nobody actually is accountable to that. In such instances, where can the congregant then go and report?
I think the difference is going to depend upon, is the pastor doing something that is actually illegal or unlawful? There's no doubt that, unfortunately, there are bad actors in the religious space. No doubt about it. There are people who are doing unlawful things. They are doing things that are criminal. In fact, everything that was ever raised for us has been more a criminal issue. If it's a criminal issue, then obviously you report it to the police, or you report it to the CRL, actually. They are also there to investigate these things. They have significant powers themselves to investigate and to recommend to any organ of state what action they believe should be taken to redress the issue.
Right.
But if it is something, let's say, a little bit more emotional, that's a bit more tricky, because yes, you can get hurt in a church. There's no doubt about it. I think many people have been hurt in the church. Many people actually no longer go to church because they were once hurt in the church. Somebody said something or did something.
Right.
But if that's an emotional issue or even a psychological issue that maybe is the consequence of that, then it's more difficult to actually say, how is that addressed? Because one person's, let's say, response to something that is said or done might be very different from somebody else's. And your freedom of religion is definitely so that if you're not happy with what's happening in your church, then you can go and find another church. You can move. I mean, sometimes people come to a church and they don't like what the pastor's saying about a certain subject and they want to shut him up. No, you can't shut him up because you don't like his opinion or his view.
Yeah,
you can go and find a church that would be more aligned with what you believe. So anything criminal, anything unlawful, the police, the Civil Rights Commission. Right. Anything that is of an emotional issue, perhaps, that is more difficult because if it doesn't cross the line into a crime or something even that's actionable civilly through civil law, then it becomes a little bit more tricky because you can't, for example, sanction somebody because they said or did something that offended you. Offense is obviously insufficient, but if they physically abused you, if they sexually abused you, if they defrauded you out of your money because they promised you a miracle if you gave 10,000 Rand or come and, give me 10,000 Rand and I'll pray for you and you'll have a wife or a husband in the next 3 weeks. But then these are all criminal. That would be an issue of fraud, for example. I think... Yeah.
As we conclude, Mr. Michael, what message would you like to share with South Africans who are right now trying to find a balance and trying to understand between religious freedom and accountability? Because I'll share with you the links and you will see the comments from different people from different walks of life all over the country actually mentioning their views on this particular issue. But what is the balance? How do people then find a balance?
Well, one of the things that was developed after the last time we went through this was a code of conduct.
Right.
And the code of conduct is basically the responsibilities that can be reasonably expected, let's say the behaviors that can be reasonably expected from pastors and from faith communities. And we want all faith communities to consider adopting this code of conduct voluntarily so that the congregants have a standard to which they can actually hold those pastors, those religious leaders, those organizations to account. So I think a code of conduct is a very positive thing, and there is one existent already that was developed the last time. And so, yes, obviously, if things are unethical, if people are behaving poorly, then they need to be held to account. And if they do something criminal, obviously, they must be held to account.
That needs to be held accountable. It's a very important conversation, Mr. Michael. And in advocacy, is the very first message that we give to anyone about any other situation. But thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us the insights and giving guidance into this very important conversation.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to be with you.
It's a great pleasure.